Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Clean Energy Future Fund information session. As you know, we've got the funding round open at the moment and closing on the 22nd of April, so it's not that far away. We've got two presenters today. Myself, I'm Ro Richardson, Principal Policy Officer with the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, and also Kendal Becu, Policy Officer with the Energy Policy DWER. So both departments are involved in the administration of the fund. And I'll be passing to Kendal for some of the content shortly. In terms of the agenda for the day, we start with an overview of the fund itself. We've got a slide on key changes from round one. Those of you who are familiar with this scheme, that's probably a key thing, but there are subtle changes all the way through, so you should stay with us and hear the rest of the information. The objectives of the fund, the ministerial priorities, which lets you know what the ministers are looking for at the moment, eligibility criteria, merit criteria, and a bit about the application and assessment process, and some time for questions. Now, with this round, we have put out two spreadsheet templates, one for the financial model and one for the risk register. And if there are questions on using those templates, can I suggest that we put those to the end, so the people who don't have questions can then sign off and we can delve a bit deeper into those questions. The key changes from round one, local government entities are now eligible. The maximum funding request is doubled to 4 million. We have additional ministerial priorities, so there are, it's much easier to meet ministerial priorities now than it was before. We have simplified the eligibility criteria, and there's been an update to the merit criteria and the weightings for the merit criteria. We're hoping to significantly speed up the assessment process, and as you've probably noticed by now, we've made some changes on the application form and some of the supporting documents. So there are changes there, and at the end of the session we'll have time for questions. Kendal, are you doing the overview? Yeah, so I'll hand over to Kendal now for the overview.
Hi, my name is Kendal Becu. I'm representing Energy Policy WA today. I'm assuming that you can see me, and I have no idea what I look like, and I probably don't want to. Just as a general overview, we're into round two at the moment. It's currently open and it closes on the 22nd of April, so you have 3 weeks left. That's probably the take-home message from this fund. We have about $16 million remaining because the government topped up with an extra $10 million last year as part of the WA recovery plan. And the other take-home message from this slide is that grants are to be paid in arrears on achievement of project milestones. So applicants should be aware that you will be putting up, paying for your costs up front, and then the government will pay you back on invoices afterwards. How do I, that one? Sorry, yeah.
I think I've gone too
I've gone too far. The objectives of the Clean Energy Future Fund is to support the implementation of innovative clean energy projects in Western Australia. Because we're using public funds, we're looking for projects that offer high public value through contributing to one or both of the objectives on this slide. You can see there's sort of two outcomes that we're looking to facilitate. The first is significant cost-effective reduction in greenhouse gases as a direct result of the project. And the second one is a bit more forward-looking and holistic, and looking for projects that are likely to lead to broad adoption or high take-up and result in significant greenhouse gas emissions in Western Australia that way. There's also an emphasis on the broader benefits that clean energy projects can bring to the state, which is outlined in more detail in the merit criteria section that Ro will take you through shortly. The ministerial priorities for the fund, if you were looking last year or applied last year, you would have noticed Ro mentioned earlier that they've changed. There are 6 ministerial priorities for the current round. These are subject to change maybe every funding round and are determined by our joint ministers, which are the Ministers for Environment and the Minister for Energy. The current 6 ministerial and all of the applications will be assessed against these ministerial priorities, as well as the eligibility and merit criteria. The first one is we're targeting innovative clean energy projects in regional and remote areas, so those areas that are not connected to our 2 main electricity grids. The second one,
or at the edges of the 2 main
or at the edges of our 2 main grids on the Swiss and the Northwest, the NUIS. The second priority is looking for projects that can improve the security and resilience of our electricity grid in line with the Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap. And I will put a link to that roadmap up in the chat section, and you can also find it on the Energy Policy WA website. The third one is clean energy projects that support the decarbonisation of existing industry and or the development of new low emissions or zero emissions industries in Western Australia. The fourth one is shovel-ready type projects or projects that can offer immediate-ish job creation. The fifth one is looking for projects that can enhance the energy efficiency and materially reduce emissions from the built environment and or manufacturing processes. And the last one is projects that support the replacement of burning diesel with renewable or clean energy. The ministerial priorities are not eligibility criteria, and if you don't feel that your project is closely aligned, you are still invited to apply. And as I said, these are subject to change every funding round between the ministers at their discretion. The eligibility criteria, the first one is that you need to be incorporated under the Commonwealth Corporations Act, or you need to be a local government entity. And as Ro said, that we've extended the criteria to local government entities for this round. The second one is that the management team must be fit and proper persons, which relates mainly to previous insolvencies of other companies and criminal convictions. The total of the Clean Energy Future Fund and all other state government funding cannot exceed 25% of your eligible costs. And another eligibility criteria is that the funding request must be for between $250,000 and $4 million. Please don't think that if you apply for slightly less than that $250,000, that will look good or get your project over the line. These are strict eligibility criteria, and if your applications don't meet them, then they won't be assessed further. The other 2 eligibility criteria is that the project must take place primarily within WA, and it needs to be a clean energy project.
This page down key is quite reliable.
It's, what am I? Excuse me, 2 seconds. I don't want to do that. Here is your definition of a clean energy project. We are looking for technologies that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the production or use of stationary energy. Basically, this doesn't involve vehicles, especially vehicles registered for road use, either internal engine combustion vehicles or electric vehicles. Vehicles that are not registered for road use are still eligible, and batteries and energy supplies that are considered from a distributed energy resources point of view in line with the DWER roadmap will be considered. But here is these other things on A through to D do not fit the definition of stationary energy. And I think that's it from me. I'm going to hand you back to Ro, but if there's any questions on any of those slides, it is all available in the applicant guidelines. I will put the link to the DWER roadmap up for you. And best of luck, everybody, with your applications. Thanks for your time. Looking forward to seeing some innovative proposals.
There's 2 questions that are published.
Okay. Neil's just mentioned that there are 2 questions so far, which I'll address probably at the end of the session. The first merit criterion is reducing emissions, and what we're looking for there is quantifiable direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And we basically be scaling that on the amount of money you're asking us to put in. Obviously, the more money we're putting in, the bigger the emissions reduction we're looking for. So it's effectively a sort of a per dollar reductions, as opposed to a bigger projects will have bigger reductions, obviously. We're also looking for alignment with the WA government's aspiration to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions across the economy. And that means that projects which are use clean energy are more likely to be aligned with that objective. The next merit criterion is the business case, which is worth 20% of the weighting on the merit score. The first element is justification. What's the project value? What are the valuable outcomes from the project? And also it checks whether there's a need for assistance. Projects that are likely to succeed without our help, or projects that might or are likely to fail even with our help, are probably going to be less value for government's money than projects where our money will make the difference between success and failure. And ideally, we're looking for projects where our funding can make the difference between success and failure, and the project will then increase the likelihood of unfunded or unsupported projects being viable after that. That could be because banks may see the example of the project that has worked, and that may make it easier for finance to be available. It could also be that technical processes could be streamlined, or data could become available from the project. The next element is technical feasibility and likelihood of success. Now, I think there is a little bit of a scale there, where if you're asking for something reasonably simple with a fairly low expectation of being copied and a wider adoption, you may get away with really less risk. So it's a whole risk and return thing, where if you're asking us to take a fairly big risk, the prize at the end of that risk has got to be commensurately large. We're looking at financial viability with support from the fund, and the strength of the technical and financial assumptions. I have provided a financial model which we recommend using, and you'll see in there that there are places where you can document all your assumptions in terms of costs of the equipment you need to buy, costs of installing the equipment, prices for things that you sell, costs of capital, interest rates, etc. And it also looks at the likelihood that all of those things can be secured, as in you'll be able to buy the equipment, you'll be able to find a customer to buy your outputs, etc. On the financial model template, I won't go into that in detail now because it is reasonably complicated and it can take half an hour quite easily. What I will do, I will, at the end of the session, once we've answered the main questions, I'll then be available to go into the model if there are questions specific to the model. But basically, it walks you through steps. The steps are what you need to spend money on, where will you get the money from, what milestones will the money be spent on, and when will they be completed, and how much energy and emissions reduction and or other products will be produced by each milestone, and then how that will be translated into money, so what revenue you'll get, either that from selling electricity or other energy, or from some sort of monetization of carbon credits. Then it's down to the viability question of whether the returns from the project actually justify the money spent. And it has a separate section where you can, gives a validation checklist to check that there are the checks for compliance with the project eligibility criteria. And there's a few other checks against the whether the information you put into the model makes sense. The next merit criterion is organizational capacity for a weighting of 10%. That looks at the technical and management capability and expertise. The applicant's track record. Now, for applicant, you should probably read the organization and the people in the organization, because I understand projects of this nature quite often are put together. The organization is actually put together to run the project. So in that case, we're really looking at the track record and experience of the people in the application. If the applicant is an organization that has a previous track record, that's great. But if it hasn't, that's not really a big negative, as long as you've got the right skills on board. We're looking at the time frame for project commencement and delivery. We're looking at the structure, partnerships, agreement, and governance, as in that's how your project sort of fits in with its customers, its suppliers, and other collaborators. We're looking for comprehensive high-quality planning, and also the likelihood of securing regulatory approvals. We don't expect you to necessarily have the regulatory approvals yet if it's a project that may not run without funding, for instance, but we do need you to have done a little bit of work to see is it feasible that we would get those approvals. Next criterion is risk management. There we're looking at the quality of your risk management plan, as in how you will track over time and manage the risks. The quality of the risk register, which is effectively the risks that you can currently foresee, and how well you've documented them, and also how well you've planned to mitigate them. And both of those are about your abilities in managing the risk, but there's also a separate one about the risks themselves. And we obviously need to be comfortable that there's a good chance that government money wouldn't be wasted if it was granted to the project. We're also looking that there will be insurance cover. Again, that may not be in place now if the project is waiting for the results of the funding application, but we would expect some sort of indication of, given the risks that you've just identified, what level of insurance cover you would expect to need, and if there was insurance you needed for specific individual risks, those may be identified as well. The risk register template that I've provided gives you an opportunity to capture the risks, the mitigation controls, and then the risks after mitigation. And there are a couple of places to look for risks. I think I might have just touched on this before, but in your financial model there will be a table, a page which looks at your assumptions. Now those will tend to be things like the availability and price of the equipment and the skills that you need to install the equipment, the technical viability of the project, and in terms of operationally, will you find a customer, will you get the right price, will you be able to get the funding you expect at the price you expect. So it's really, the assumptions in your financial model is a fairly good source of risks for your risk register. Next merit criteria is potential for wider adoption. Now we have touched on this before, but it is an ambition and an aspiration of the project that we fund projects which enable future projects to run without support, and by doing so create environmental good and also economic activity for the state. So in order to be in that category, you really need to be doing something that's not common practice. There needs to be an element of innovation in your project, so that that innovation would then be available to be copied. Now, when we're looking for other implementations, there are two categories here. These are implementations that you may make in other locations, or extending or somehow growing the system once you've proved it with our support. But there's also a concept that it might spawn new industries where other people may actually enter the industry and create similar, effectively copies of similar projects. Now, I understand there that there will be an issue of intellectual property, and we're not asking you to give up all your intellectual property, but we are asking you to have a data sharing or a knowledge sharing plan where information that you can share are often that could be along the lines of resource data or other data, and often it's maybe stuff that you want to share because you want potential customers to see how good your project is. But that may also help other people to enter that environment or industry. We're also looking for ongoing commitment, which ties in with other implementations by the applicant. We're hoping to have applicants that have plans to, once they've run a successful project, go on and implement and develop similar and improved projects down the road. We have I think this is the final criteria, is public good. We've touched briefly on knowledge sharing. We're looking at building capacity in your own staff and in others, and economic development, how many jobs are created, or new industries created, or new business practices. We're really trying to get the biggest benefit for Western Australia out of the government funding that we put into these projects. Moving on, this is how to apply. I was expecting some elements on the side of the slide. Do you have some elements on the side of the slide?
Not on my screen.
Okay.
They're not coming up for some reason.
Yeah. Sorry, well, I'll just talk through those. I'm sorry about that. The first thing is to go to our website, which is, we've set up a convenient link for you, wa.gov.au. It's a standard government, Western Australia government link, /CEFF for Clean Energy Future Fund. So it's wa.gov.au/CEFF, and that takes you to our website. And on the website, under how to apply, there's a whole lot of documents you can download. You need to, there's several. The applicant guidelines will give you an indication of all of the eligibility and merit criteria, ministerial priorities, etc. Once you've read through those, you should download the application form and fill that in. It also has the template for financial model and a worked example. It's probably easier to, I suggest that if you're going to use the template, that you do download and look at the worked example, because that will show you the type of information that gets filled in. Once you've completed all of those documents, you should email them to the standard email address, which is ceff@wa.gov.au. In round one, we did use a special email address for applications, but we are not doing that in round two. So you'll use the same email address you use for other correspondence, just the ceff@dwer.wa.gov.au. Okay. You need to submit the email by effectively midnight at the end of the 22nd of April. And please bear in mind that sometimes things with large attachments can either be delayed or sometimes even bounced in the email system. And we don't have a lot of flexibility in accommodating that. So I would suggest that you get your email sent in effectively before close of business, where you could sort of ring and check that we've received exactly what you've sent, and there's a bit of time to work with IT departments, etc., if necessary, or look at ways of breaking up the document into pieces and sending the pieces if that becomes a problem. The next slide. Oh, this slide builds. That's why
I thought about the custom animation.
That's why it wasn't there up front. Yeah. Okay. There is a checklist at the end of the form which you should review before you push the send button. In terms of the assessment process, the applications are considered against eligibility and merit criteria and considered for alignment with the ministerial priorities. Applicants may be asked clarification questions. So if we do have questions reading through your application, we will send you those questions as soon as they arise and give you some time to respond on those. And once the assessment is complete, the assessment panel which consists of 2 senior people from the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation and 2 senior people from the Energy Policy WA, will send their recommendations to the ministers. The ministers will make their decision, and the selected applicants will then be asked to supply due diligence information to go through a financial due diligence process. Now, the purpose of that is it's a professional service that we subscribe to, and it costs us to do that. So we don't want to do that through all applications. There is obviously a cost to the selected applicants to provide the information. They've got to gather the information and supply it. And we've got to pay the government's expense for the due diligence assessment. Now, once the due diligence assessment has come back, and we know that the which applications are without problem on the due diligence, we then move on and notify all the applicants by email. So the unsuccessful applicants and the successful applicants who have been through the due diligence process will be notified. The successful applicants are invited to enter a funding agreement, and the unsuccessful applicants may request feedback from DWER. And the ministers will generally do an announcement of the outcome. In terms of timetable, the round 2 opened on the 25th of January, and it closes, as I mentioned, on the end of the 22nd of April. Now, I've had quite a few questions on how long the assessment process will take, how long the ministerial decisions will take, how long the due diligence will take, and when the outcome will be announced. And it's reasonably difficult to predict at this stage because we don't know how many applications we'll receive. And we're also working on ways to speed up the assessment process because it was too slow in round 1. We're expecting it to be in the second half of calendar 2021. I would hope that's sort of towards the front of that second half. And that moves us to the end of the body of the presentation, and it's probably time now to take questions. So I don't know, Neil or Kendal, do we have any questions?
We have one good question about our control or grid management systems for EV charging. Is that excluded as transport? And I feel we have to take that on notice until we speak to Energy Policy WA.
Yeah, actually, let me try and switch across to the questions so that I can see them. Sorry, Kendal, can you run through the question again?
So control or grid management systems for electric vehicle charging excluded as transport.
Yeah.
I'm going to say we're taking it on notice, and the answer will be published on the website, because we're saying not necessarily if it's from DWER.
Yes. I think Kendal is spot on that, that question you will need to get an official view on what the answer is. Now, what we do in that case, probity prevents us giving answers in a forum where not all of the applicants are available for that, that aren't already public. So when we get questions that we don't have the answers to in already published documents, what we do is we take them on notice, we get an official answer approved, and we post that up on the website, and we send an email to everyone who's on our subscriber list for emails to let them know that the website has been updated with that question. So there's a couple of elements there. One is I would encourage you, if you haven't already subscribed, to go to our website, scroll down to the bottom, and there is an option to subscribe there. That way you'll get notified of any new information about the fund. And Kendal and I will take away the question which has already been posed and get an official answer for that and post it on the website. Okay. I see there's a question from somebody asking whether the slides will be available afterwards. Now, what we intend to do is to post them on the website. So that should be up in a couple of days.
We've also had a question about payment timeframes following when people lodge their invoices, when they can expect to be paid for their investments.
That's a good question. How long will it take DWER to make payment once an application, once a a successful applicant or a funded project submits a milestone report. Now, the process when a milestone report is received is that we need to make sure that it contains sufficient evidence that the milestone has been achieved and that the funding which was planned to achieve that milestone has actually been spent and effectively receipted. If all of that is in place, we endeavour to pay within 30 days and hopefully quicker than that sometimes, mostly. If there are issues about needing to validate or verify that the milestone has actually been completed, it may run a little bit longer. I'm trying to see whether there were any other questions there.
Just I've got 3 ones.
There's a question about that regional council one.
Do you require organisational capacity evidence and insurances for our regional council and the local governments we are submitting the application for?
So one applicant is saying multiple councils will making that submission together.
I think that where a regional council makes a submission, I mean, there's probably a reasonable knowledge that the council will have certain skills within the council. If the project needs skills which wouldn't necessarily be expected to be in the council, then we might require. Am I answering the right question there?
I think so, and we can check that and publish it as well, so we can take that one on notice. We've had another one for. I just lost one.
Are in-kind contributions of labour, equipment and data analysis considered as co-contributions to cost?
Okay. On the topic of in-kind contributions, any work which would be eligible if done by an outsourced party, so if you were going to pay someone else to do effectively professional services or data gathering, then we shouldn't be pushing you to get that outsourced. So the view is that in-kind internal costs to do work which would be eligible if done externally are accepted. Now, there is a bit of a complication in that it's reasonably difficult to be sure that you're claiming at market rates. So there are a couple of things there. One is if your application is successful, we'll want to see, or in fact, in your application that you make, you should indicate what percentage of your, or what component of your costs will be in kind per milestone, and ideally how many hours of what skill type or professional role and at what rate you're costing, so that we can have a bit of transparency into how you got to the number and a bit of ability to compare that with market rates. The other thing is that we'll probably, if you are successful and get to sign a contract, we would expect that claims for in-kind costs would be signed by either your CEO or somebody very senior in the organization, because we would want to be sure that those were carefully checked for accuracy.
Can you start the application once you have submitted the application? Can you start the project once you've submitted the application?
That's a good question. There are two aspects here. I don't know if everyone heard the question. Can you start your project once you've submitted the application? Now, one of the things that we will be measuring, I think I mentioned this briefly in terms of the business case, which is worth 20% of your merit, is that we'll be looking there at projects which really need our funding to start. And if the project starts without us, without knowing that they've been successful, it does indicate to us that they probably didn't really need to be sure that they were going to get our funding before they kicked off. So that might reduce the score for that 20% of merit. The second thing is the definition of eligible costs, which is covered in the applicant guidelines, is quite explicit that costs which have been committed before funding was approved for the project are not eligible as costs. So you may be able to be funded for the remaining milestones that aren't committed yet, but effectively expenditure towards milestones before that's committed before the project is funded is not eligible.
We have a question. Will support from NAIF count as other WA government support? But I'm not sure what NAIF is. I'll ask them to.
I think NAIF is the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund.
If it's a state government fund, then no.
I think the NAIF is actually a Commonwealth fund, and you can have as much Commonwealth funding in your funding as you want. Basically, the requirement from us is that the funding from the WA state, which is the Clean Energy Future Fund, plus any other WA state funding, is less than or equal to 25%.
Okay, there's a couple that we haven't answered. So one is, are round 3 dates available?
Round 3 dates aren't available and actually haven't been set yet. There is kind of an expectation that these things are approximately annual. So I would look for one in 2022. But having said that, it could possibly be earlier than that. It could be later than that. It'll depend on how much money is available after this round, and also will probably depend on government priorities here.
We've got one question. Good question. Will grant expenditure require external audits as ARENA funding does?
Yeah. The question is, will grant funding require external audits as ARENA does? And I think that's one we're going to have to take on notice and post on the website with the result for the answer.
Okay.
Did you want to go through your financial spreadsheet?
I don't know, does anyone interested to have a quick look at the financial spreadsheet? We have, I think what I'll do now is if we've finished the published questions, so the asked questions, then I will let anyone who's not interested in watching the spreadsheet piece leave, and you can go deep dive into the spreadsheet.
A few people have already logged out. Got 20
Okay.
attendees from 28.
So what I will do, I will stop sharing that spreadsheet, so that and I'll share. Okay, you should have a view of the spreadsheet now, and this has several tabs at the bottom. The main tab is the financial model. There is an instructions tab, which talks you through how to use it. In the financial tab, we have a block here where you capture the costs you'll need to spend for your project. And that's all the various pieces you're going to spend. There's a block down here where you fill in what you're going to spend, where you're going to get the money. There's a small block where you put the project start date and the operational life. And then you move up to the milestone table where the costs run across horizontally from your expenses, and your milestones run vertically down, and the expense spent at each milestone is indicated by the percentage figure in the overlap of those two, in the table where the milestones and costs overlap. If I scroll a little bit to the right, you'll see that there's a totals column, and that just checks that every cost is allocated to a milestone. Moving down a bit, we have the operational life in years of each. I've used milestones as effectively things that get built, some of which will generate energy and or emission savings and possibly other products and revenue. but not all of them will. For example, we've got getting approvals and site works are milestones that don't feed into the outputs and or the revenue stream. Once we know the operating life of for each milestone and the number of months after the start of the project where that milestone is complete, we can then work out the month that it ends, and that allows us to work out which months the revenue is effectively counted for. Those eligible costs include costs which may not, we have full costs and we have eligible costs, which is just the ones acceptable to the fund. And then we have just a check here that we don't exceed the 25% funding of eligible costs at each milestone. We moved on to look at project outputs and inputs, and that box effectively lets you calculate all of the outputs that you'll make and what revenue you can get from them and the carbon emission savings from them. Now, in both cases, there's an other revenue per year here where you could capture things that aren't necessarily built into the spreadsheet yet. And I think we have other carbon impacts as well somewhere, other emissions reduction or increase. So while the spreadsheet is fairly simple, we do have those places to capture anything that's not included. That flows down into the cash flow section, where for each year it looks at what your cash flow is and also how the capital expenditure that you spent on the milestones fits into the year.
Excuse me, right?
Sorry,
we've had a question. Can a successful Clean Energy Future Fund project also receive funding from CO2 emissions credits from other sources? So that might be the place to answer that.
Yes. So if you didn't get that question, it's about whether CO2 credits from other sources can be included, and the answer is yes. We would expect you to include any revenue you get from selling emissions reductions. And that is built into the spreadsheet, and it effectively adds to the financial viability of your project, so it would be seen as a benefit. If we move across here in this section 6, we get to a section that shows the viability without Clean Energy Future Fund funding. And that looks at your internal rate of return, your discounted net present value, and there's a rough payback in years by counting the number of years for which you haven't broken even yet. And there's a similar one for the Clean Energy Future with Clean Energy Future Fund. So that allows you and the assessors to compare the impact of the funding on your project. If you move up, then there's a validation section here where there's a lot of criteria down here, and there's a lot of formula which check that criteria, and you need to have them all set to true. If any of those goes to false, you should look at why it's false, and you should rectify the thing, because basically if it's false, it means that there are issues that will be an issue for evaluation of your project. We've also got the justification of assumptions tab. I'll just scroll to the top so we can see that. What we've done now is we've pulled out financial assumptions that you have filled in on the previous tab and given you effectively a green box to put in text about why you believe, for instance, in this case, that you can buy the solar panels that you need for $2 million. Have you got a quote? Is there a listed price? Have you got a memorandum of understanding with somebody? This page, this tab of the spreadsheet is really checking all of the financial assumptions around the project. The other thing that we derive from the financial model is the milestone table, which tells you what you're going to, what each milestone is, how many months from start when it completes, and then works out the completion date based on the months since and knowing what the start date was, the eligible expenditure you expect to complete the project, and how much Clean Energy Future funding you have expected. Now, what you will need to add in for your milestone table at some point, at least before we sign the thing, is what evidence you'll provide that that milestone is complete.
Well, we've just got another question about eligible costs. STC's eligible cost, which I believe is small scale technology certificates.
Okay, I wouldn't see, my understanding of small scale technology certificates, is that like REX where an installer may, I'm not sure I understand what STCs are.
Yeah, we might have to get back to you on that, unless Kendal, you know.
No.
Unless the person with a question can maybe clarify exactly why STCs would be a cost.
In surrendering them?
Yeah, because normally green energy or green carbon certificates are actually a value that you get paid for.
I'm on the Clean Energy Regulator website, and it doesn't appear that there's a cost associated, but maybe they can clarify.
So I think if there are no further questions, it's probably time to call it a day. Okay.
Two more questions, sorry. Yes, REX, revenue side, not costs.
Okay. REX definitely are revenue side. I think STC is maybe a different name for them.
And then please ignore question 9, sorry.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks everybody. And if you have questions after this, you can email them through to ceff@dwer.wa.gov.au.
Does it all have to be milestones, or if we have a $10 million bankability study, can we apply for 2.5 million? I feel that's clear back in it is all milestones. Does it all?
Yeah, we do need to manage the project as milestones, yes.
Yeah, did you want to read that one out loud?
Okay, the question is, does it have to be all milestones, or if we have a $10 million bankability study, can we apply for 2.5 million? If you are spending a large amount of money on a bankability survey, I would expect it to be broken down into components.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any new questions coming?
Yes, look, I have a question.
Okay.
I can't actually see what the question is. Could you please ask out loud, whoever has a question, if they could send it if I haven't seen it, if they don't know to send it again?
If anyone has a question that we haven't answered yet, could you please maybe resend it?
It only came through a minute ago, so. Can you see anything that I can't hear?
No. Maybe it was around the previous question I asked.
Yeah. If you want to just clarify, Ro, that we'll sign off, but if there are any more questions, to either send them through right now or to the email. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to close the session, but feel free to send through email questions, which we'll answer by email, or if they do require further information, we'll then take those up for approval before we send the response. Okay. Thanks for attending, everybody. Bye.